Hello, my name is Brooke Ellington. I'm 27 years old, and this is my story. If someone had told me a year ago that my life would completely unravel, not because of a stranger or a tragedy, but because of my own sister, I would have laughed, or maybe cried, depending on the day. I grew up believing that loyalty ran deepest in families, that no matter what happened in the world, your family was your anchor. But the thing about betrayal is that it never comes from your enemies. It comes from those you trust most. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your story too. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe that healing is the best kind of revenge. I was born and raised in Reno, Nevada. My mother, Claudia, was a strong, elegant woman who ran a local flower shop on the corner of Plumas and California Avenue. She was everything to me. My dad passed away when I was 10, so it was always just me, my mother, and my older sister, Vanessa. Vanessa was 3 years older and complicated. We were never close. She was always chasing the next big thing, the next boyfriend, the next job, the next city. I, on the other hand, stayed close to home. I studied accounting at the University of Nevada and eventually got a job at a mid-size firm downtown. That's where I met Ryan Carter. Ryan was unlike anyone I'd ever dated. Charming, ambitious, with a quiet confidence that made people listen when he spoke. He was the new partner at the firm, and within weeks of meeting, we were inseparable. I used to say he was my reward after years of watching other people find love. He came from money, had big plans for the future, and made me feel like I belonged in a life I'd only ever seen in magazines. He'd surprise me with weekend getaways to Lake Tahoe, took me to wine tastings in Napa, and even met my mother for Sunday dinners, something no man had ever dared to do before. Vanessa met him only once during a family dinner, months into our relationship. She showed up late, wearing a designer dress that hugged her a little too tight, and lipstick a shade too bold for the occasion. She kissed Ryan on the cheek, too slowly, and complimented his watch as if she were testing boundaries. I remember the way she looked at me that night, like I was holding something she thought should have been hers. Still, I tried not to read too much into it. Vanessa had always been that way. Dramatic, flirtatious, a bit self-centered. But family was family, and I didn't want to stir unnecessary tension. When Ryan proposed to me on a weekend trip to Big Sur, I called her immediately. She screamed with excitement, insisted on helping with the wedding, and even volunteered to plan my bridal shower. And that's where the cracks started to show. Vanessa's help turned into control. Every suggestion I made, she'd twist into something more modern, more her. She took over the bridal shower guest list and invited half her modeling agency friends, people I didn't even know. She criticized the dress I picked, saying it was sweet, but not elegant enough for a man like Ryan. When I confronted her about it, she played the victim. "I'm just trying to help, Brooke. You always take things so personally." I began to distance myself from her, but it was hard. My mother had just been diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer, and I didn't have the energy to fight with Vanessa. I was watching the woman who raised me fade away day by day, and I needed my sister, or at least the version of her I still hoped existed. Ryan, meanwhile, was my rock through all of it. He stayed with me overnight at the hospital, picked up my mom's prescriptions, and even carried her into her bedroom when she got too weak to walk. Seeing him take care of her that way made me love him even more. But things were changing behind my back. There were signs. Ryan started canceling dinner plans last minute. He became distracted during conversations, scrolling through his phone more than usual. One night, I walked into the living room to find him ending a call quickly and tucking his phone under a couch pillow. When I asked who he was talking to, he said it was work. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. I was already losing my mother. I couldn't handle the thought of losing the man I was about to marry. My mother passed away in late spring. The night before her funeral, I stayed up until dawn going through her photo albums. Pictures of me and Vanessa playing by the Truckee River, birthday parties at Idlewild Park, holidays in front of the fireplace. It all felt so distant now. Vanessa was staying at a hotel across town, claiming she needed space. Ryan said he had a business emergency and would meet me at the funeral. That morning, I stood at the front of the church, watching people file in with solemn expressions and sad smiles. I waited and waited, but Ryan never came. I called his phone. No answer. Texted. Nothing. I tried not to panic. Tried to focus on saying goodbye to the woman who gave me everything. But somewhere deep in my stomach, a sickness was forming. After the service, I finally received a message from him. We need to talk. I didn't hear from him for 3 days. When I did, it was through a mutual friend. She told me Ryan and Vanessa had been seen together at a luxury hotel off the Vegas Strip, arm in arm, checking in under aliases. I felt the air leave my lungs. I called his number again and again. He never answered. Vanessa didn't even try to deny it when I confronted her. She looked at me like I was the naive one, like I should have seen it coming. You weren't enough for him, she said, her voice cold and cruel. Some people just belong in a different league. That sentence burned itself into my memory. Not just the words, but the smug smile on her face as she said them. That day, something broke inside me. Not just my heart, my entire belief system. I had been loyal, kind, forgiving, and look where it got me. Alone, betrayed, humiliated. But that's not how my story ends. You see, grief is a strange teacher. It strips you bare, forces you to see who you really are. And in that darkness, I found something I didn't know I had. Strength. Cold, sharp, unwavering strength. And I used it to rebuild my life, not with forgiveness, but with purpose. What Vanessa didn't know was that while she was busy playing games, I was watching, learning, waiting. Because some betrayals don't deserve redemption. Some stories aren't about healing, they're about justice. And this was just the beginning. After that moment in the cemetery, I disappeared. Not physically. I still went to work, still showed up at social events when I had to, still responded to emails with a smiley face and a polite, "Hope you're doing well." But something inside me retreated so deeply that not even I could fully reach it. I wasn't grieving anymore, not just for my mother, but for the life I thought I had. My fiancé was gone, stolen by the one person who was supposed to protect me, my sister, Vanessa, the woman who used to braid my hair before school, who held my hand when our father died. That same woman had looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't enough. And Ryan, the man who promised me forever, couldn't even offer me a goodbye. I went through the motions of life like someone walking underwater. The world felt muffled, slow, unreal. But deep in that stillness, something sharp started to grow. 3 weeks after the funeral, I saw the first photo of them together. It was a tagged picture on someone else's Instagram. Ryan and Vanessa, dressed in designer clothes, sipping champagne at a resort in Napa, his arm around her waist, her lips close to his ear, laughing. At first, I couldn't even breathe. But then, after the sting, came clarity. That picture was more than just a betrayal. It was motivation. It was the confirmation I needed to stop playing the victim and start playing the long game. I didn't want them back. That was never the plan. I wanted them to fall, to hurt, to feel what I felt, multiplied by 10. Not with petty revenge, not with screaming or scandal. No, I wanted elegance, precision. I wanted to take from them what they valued most: status, comfort, reputation. Everything they built on lies, I would unravel with truth and time, and I knew exactly where to start. Ryan was still a partner at the firm, which meant he had plenty of secrets. Deals, loopholes, potential violations buried under layers of spreadsheets and private emails. I had worked under him for over a year. I knew the systems. I knew how he operated. I didn't need to hack anything. I just needed to remember. Slowly, I started documenting every memory I had from our work days. Casual mentions of offshore investments, odd client meetings held outside the office, transfer requests that didn't follow protocol. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for at first, but I kept going. I started pulling publicly available documents. I read late into the night, building a puzzle piece by piece. Meanwhile, Vanessa had inserted herself into the Reno social scene like a queen reclaiming her throne. She attended galas, charity events, openings, always on Ryan's arm. She posted filtered pictures of them, building their empire and living their truth. I followed it all silently, learning her routines, her weaknesses. I didn't want to confront her. I wanted her to become comfortable, complacent. That's when people make mistakes. One day, a friend of mine who worked at a boutique hotel downtown called me. "I don't know if this is something you want to hear," she said cautiously, "but your sister comes here. Often. Not with Ryan." My pulse quickened. I tried to sound casual. "Someone else?" She hesitated. "Yeah. Someone older. Richer, from what I can tell. They're always discreet. Separate check-ins, aliases, but it's definitely her. She even signed for a spa treatment under the name Erica Dawson." I wrote it down. Erica Dawson. She was smart enough to create distance, but not smart enough to cover all her tracks. I waited another month, collecting more crumbs. Ryan had recently launched a side consultancy with Vanessa, or so they claimed. Their website was polished, the branding sharp. They offered lifestyle coaching for elite professionals. But it was just a vanity project, a shell to funnel money and attract wealthy clients who didn't ask too many questions. Through one of my former clients, I heard they were pitching a large contract to an international investor. That was my window. I reached out to the investor anonymously. I drafted a packet of inconsistencies, misfiled tax forms, and proof of Vanessa's ongoing affair with a separate businessman, who, by the way, was married with 3 children in Los Angeles. I didn't send accusations. I just sent questions. Questions that opened doubt. Questions that forced them to pause. 2 weeks later, the deal fell through. I didn't need to know the details. All I needed to know was that the cracks had started to form. Vanessa called me that night. "I know it was you," she said, her voice shaking with restrained fury. "You think you're clever? You think this changes anything?" I smiled into the receiver. "I think it already has." She hung up. Ryan didn't call. Of course he didn't. He never faced anything directly, but I could feel his presence pulling away from her. He stopped appearing in her Instagram posts. His name was removed from the consultancy website. Rumors swirled through mutual acquaintances. "They're having trouble. She's seeing someone else." He found out. I wasn't done. I reached out to a journalist in Vegas, someone I knew from a financial ethics seminar I had once attended. I gave her everything I had, under the condition of anonymity. She ran a piece on shady business coaching startups and mentioned Ryan and Vanessa's firm as an example of unregulated exploitation of elite clients. It wasn't a takedown. It was a paper cut. But enough of those, and you start to bleed. Meanwhile, I began building my own life again, slowly, carefully, differently. I left the firm where Ryan had worked and accepted a position at a startup in Lake Tahoe. Smaller team, higher integrity. I moved into a little cottage on the west side of Reno. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. Every morning, I woke up to silence, coffee, and the sound of my mother's wind chimes outside my window. Some mornings I cried, some mornings I didn't. Then one morning, I met someone. It wasn't dramatic. No grand romantic scene. Just a man at the same coffee shop, reaching for the same book I had left on the table. His name was Marcus. He was quiet, thoughtful, and didn't ask me questions I wasn't ready to answer. We talked about music, books, the lake. We spent weekends hiking in the Carson Range, cooking dinners at home. He never asked about my past. But one day, I told him everything, every ugly piece, and he didn't flinch. He just took my hand and said, "You didn't deserve that, but I'm glad you're here now." That's when I knew. I didn't need to destroy them completely. I just needed them to feel it. That shift, that loss, that realization that I had risen from the ashes they tried to bury me in. I had love again. I had peace. But I still had one more card to play. My mother's final wish was that we scatter her ashes at Lake Pyramid, where she used to take us as children. I arranged the gathering, invited close family, a few friends. And yes, I invited Vanessa. And I invited Marcus. She didn't know we were married yet. She thought I was still the grieving, broken little sister. She had no idea what was coming. The morning of the memorial was unusually calm for early fall. The wind that usually swept through the desert hills just north of Reno had softened to a breeze, the kind that only barely disturbed the wild sagebrush. I arrived early, of course. I always did. The lake shimmered in the distance like a memory too vivid to forget, stretching out endlessly with its cool blue surface reflecting the pale Nevada sky. My mother loved it here. She said it reminded her that peace didn't have to be loud to be powerful. I remembered how she'd sit in her lawn chair with a book and let the waves speak for her. And in a way, I suppose they still did. I had coordinated every detail myself, from the floral arrangements that matched my mother's favorite dahlias to the exact playlist of soft jazz playing in the background, just the way she liked. I didn't hire a planner, didn't ask Vanessa for help. This was my moment, my closure, and my stage. Marcus stood beside me as people started arriving. Dressed in a charcoal suit with a navy blue tie that brought out his ocean-colored eyes, he looked like he'd stepped straight out of a classic film, but he wasn't flashy. That was what I loved most about him. He didn't need to perform. He didn't crave attention. He just held my hand quietly and offered his warmth, like a lighthouse guiding me through a long, dark journey home. Then I saw her. Vanessa emerged from her black Range Rover like royalty arriving at her own coronation. Dressed in designer black silk, with a diamond-studded brooch and heels far too high for the gravel underfoot, she walked with the confidence of someone who believed the world still belonged to her. For a moment, our eyes locked, and in that split second, I saw it. The confusion, the flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Because Marcus was standing right next to me, and he wasn't just a date. He had a wedding band that matched mine. Subtle, elegant, gold with a small black sapphire in the center, my mother's birthstone. I turned to him and softly said, "Are you ready?" He nodded. I stepped up to the small podium we had placed by the shore and began the ceremony. I kept it short. My mother hated long goodbyes. I shared stories of her kindness, her strength, her relentless work ethic, and her dry humor that often caught people off guard. Vanessa sat silently, legs crossed, sunglasses hiding her eyes. I could feel her presence like a shadow crawling across my back. After I scattered the ashes into the lake, I stood quietly for a few minutes, listening to the rustling of the water against the rocks, the whispers of the wind winding through the sage. Then, without looking behind me, I said, "Thank you all for coming. There's one last thing I'd like to share before we part ways." I turned toward the crowd. My voice remained steady. I know grief can bring out strange things in people. It can make us selfish, fearful, even cruel. But it can also show us who we really are, and who others have always been. I didn't say her name. I didn't need to. But the silence was so loud, even the birds had stopped singing. My mother always told me to trust actions, not words. And that advice saved my life this year. It showed me who deserved my love, and who only ever wanted to use it. So to those who betrayed me, I forgive you. But I won't forget you. And I won't carry you into the life I'm building now. Then I turned toward Marcus. This man stood by me when the world crumbled. He didn't come into my life to impress me. He came to understand me, to heal with me. And a month ago, in a quiet ceremony surrounded by honesty and hope, I married him. There was a ripple through the crowd. Some gasps, some smiles, a few glances exchanged. But Vanessa's reaction was everything I'd hoped for. She froze. Her face paled beneath her makeup. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her jaw clenched slightly, and her sunglasses shifted just enough for me to see her eyes. Wide, wounded, and suddenly so small. In that moment, she realized she had lost. Not just the man, but the war she started. Because I had rebuilt myself without burning everything down. I had moved on while she was still standing in the ruins she helped create. After the ceremony, people mingled quietly, offering condolences, sharing memories. Vanessa approached me slowly, like a snake pretending to be tame. "Brooke," she began, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You didn't tell me you were seeing someone, let alone that you got married." I tilted my head slightly. "There were a lot of things I didn't feel the need to share with you anymore." She blinked, caught off guard by my directness. "Wow, I guess grief changes people." "No," I said. "Betrayal does." Marcus appeared beside me, placing a gentle hand on my back. "Everything okay here?" "Perfect," I replied, locking eyes with her. "We were just finishing up." Vanessa opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came. She turned and walked away, slower than usual, the gravel crunching beneath her heels like the sound of a closing chapter. But the story didn't end there. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photo, Ryan, sitting alone at a bar, slouched over a drink, looking lost. On the back, scribbled in messy handwriting, were the words, "Are you happy now?" I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because happiness wasn't the goal. Freedom was. And I had it now. Vanessa had gone quiet on social media. The glamorous posts disappeared. The followers dwindled. People whispered. The businessmen she was sneaking around with. His wife had found out. Divorced him. Took half his assets. Word got out that Vanessa had been part of the reason. Her modeling contracts began to dry up. Her business ventures collapsed one by one. And Ryan? He resigned from the firm. Quietly. No farewell party. No public statement. Just a disappearance. Meanwhile, Marcus and I thrived. We didn't chase headlines. We built a quiet, strong life. He opened a local consultancy focused on small business ethics. I taught financial literacy workshops at the local community center. We traveled. We hiked. We laughed. Every day, I woke up beside a man who saw me as an equal, not a trophy. And every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who had walked through fire and come out forged in steel. Because sometimes vengeance doesn't come in the form of flames or fury. Sometimes it comes dressed as peace. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is a life well lived, one they can't touch, can't ruin, can't even understand. Life after devastation is a strange, quiet thing. It doesn't come back in a flood of good news or happy coincidences. It returns in fragments, slow and deliberate, like pieces of sunlight breaking through dusty blinds. That was how it felt after everything collapsed and I started to rebuild. Not with a vengeance in the explosive sense, but with intention, with clarity. I didn't need to scream to be heard. I just needed to live better than they expected. Marcus and I fell into a rhythm that soothed me. He wasn't perfect, and neither was I, but we respected each other in ways I had forgotten were even possible. He never asked for more than I could give. If I woke up in the middle of the night from a nightmare, he didn't question it. He simply reached for my hand, held it until the tremors in my chest stilled. When I told him stories about my mom, how she used to sing softly while sweeping the kitchen, how she insisted tea solved most of life's problems, he listened like every word was sacred. That was the difference. Ryan had adored the idea of me, the way I looked beside him, the compliments we received as a couple. Marcus loved the quiet, messy, deeply human parts of me, and I began to love them too. I started working part-time at a local nonprofit, teaching budgeting and financial planning to women starting over. Some were leaving abusive relationships. Others were fresh out of rehab or prison or decades of neglect. I saw myself in their eyes, the wary glance, the forced smile, the uncertainty that anything could ever feel normal again. But I also saw fire. Not rage, necessarily, but a desire to survive, to reclaim. I spoke to them plainly, without pity or condescension. I told them about my mistakes, about the man who left me without a goodbye, about the sister who cut me open with her betrayal. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. What mattered was the survival, the refusal to stay buried. One of the women in my class, her name was Melina, came up to me after a session one day. She was maybe 45, with sharp eyes and deep smile lines that told stories even before she spoke. "You don't talk like someone who got revenge," she said, folding her arms across her chest. I smiled faintly. "Maybe not the kind you see in movies. But you still did it," she said, not as a question, but a fact. "You took it back." "I took myself back," I corrected. She nodded, her eyes shining. "That's the kind that lasts." That night, I sat on our porch with Marcus, a blanket around our shoulders and a glass of wine in each hand. The stars above Reno shimmered like a million tiny promises. I told him what Melina had said, and he chuckled softly. "She's right," he said. "You didn't burn their house down. You built a better one next door." And it was true. I hadn't needed to destroy Vanessa and Ryan entirely. They had done most of that themselves. What I did was reclaim control over how their actions affected me. I no longer flinched at their names. I didn't stalk their profiles or wonder what they were doing. I had released them from my story, and in doing so, I had released myself. But closure is a process, not a moment. And life, being what it is, doesn't let you move forward without testing whether you really mean it. One afternoon, nearly 9 months after the memorial at the lake, I received a message from a blocked number. It was short, just 4 words. I need your help. I stared at the screen for several seconds before closing it. I didn't reply. But the next day, another message arrived. This time, it was longer. Brooke, I know I don't deserve it, but I'm out of options. Ryan's gone. The business failed. I'm being sued by 2 clients. I can't afford a lawyer. I don't know where else to go. Vanessa. I sat with it for a while. My first instinct was anger. Not hot, searing rage, just a cold flicker of disbelief. She wasn't apologizing. She was just desperate. And part of me wanted to feel triumphant, to bask in her collapse. But what I felt instead was distance. Her pain no longer fed me. It didn't validate or excite me. It just felt tired. I didn't respond, but I didn't delete the message either. Instead, I opened a blank document and began to write. Not to her, but to myself. I wrote about everything. The betrayal, the silence, the numbness. The nights I thought I'd never feel normal again. I wrote until the ache became a rhythm, until my fingers trembled and the words blurred on the screen. And when I finished, I read it out loud. To Marcus. To the air. To the ghosts that still haunted the corners of my memory. Then I hit save, closed the laptop, and went for a walk. I didn't tell Marcus about the message for days. When I finally did, he simply asked, "What do you want to do?" I thought about it. Really thought. "I want her to know I'm not the same person she left behind," I said. "But I don't want to go back into that world just to prove it." "Then don't," he said. "Sometimes the best answer is no answer at all." So I let it be. I kept teaching. I kept living. Vanessa became just another lesson, a chapter in a book I no longer needed to reread. I heard through an old friend that she had moved back to Los Angeles, staying with a distant cousin while sorting through the legal mess she'd created. Ryan had vanished off the grid completely. No social media, no business activity. Gone. And I was thriving. Marcus and I took a trip to Maine where he'd grown up. We walked through lighthouses and quiet harbors, bought jam from local farm stands, and danced barefoot in a thunderstorm. I got a tattoo on my ribs, a single dahlia, for my mother, for resilience, for starting again. When the artist asked what it meant, I said simply, everything. I also started writing essays for a local column, stories about starting over, about family, about betrayal and redemption. One of them got picked up by a national blog, then another by a publisher. Before I knew it, I had an agent asking if I'd ever considered writing a memoir. The idea terrified me, but Marcus encouraged me. "Not because you owe anyone the story," he said, "but because it might help someone else find their way out too." And so I wrote. Not to shame, not to expose, but to illuminate the quiet resilience so many women carry in silence. To say, I see you. I survived too, and you can as well. One evening, after mailing a signed contract to the publisher, I walked back into our kitchen and found Marcus making dinner, jazz playing softly, the smell of roasted garlic and tomatoes filling the air. He looked up and smiled, and I felt something deep and certain bloom in my chest. This was my life now. Not a prize for suffering, not a victory dance for outlasting pain, but a life I built with intention, one where I didn't have to shrink or beg or apologize for existing. I had become the woman my younger self needed, and I had done it without turning into the very thing that broke me. That was the real revenge. Becoming more than they ever imagined, without ever becoming like them. It had been almost a year since the funeral, 12 long, transformative months. And though I rarely thought about Vanessa anymore, there were still moments, subtle, quiet ones, when the past reached for me. A familiar perfume drifting by in the grocery store, a song my mother used to hum, floating from the window of a passing car, or the occasional email from someone who didn't know the full story, asking, "Are you and Ryan still together?" As if the memory of that name hadn't already been buried beneath layers of growth and healing. But life has a way of circling back, not always out of malice, but sometimes to see what you'll do when the ghosts return. It was early March when the storm hit. A literal one, not metaphorical. Reno was blanketed in an unusual spring snow, and the city slowed under its weight. That morning, I had just finished editing the last chapter of my manuscript, The working title was simple but honest. The Things We Reclaim. Marcus had made coffee, the kind I loved, dark roast with a hint of cinnamon, and was humming to himself while reading by the window. It was an ordinary day wrapped in peace, the kind I had once thought I'd never have again. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps, measured, uncertain. I opened the door, expecting a neighbor or maybe a delivery, but what I saw stole the air from my lungs. Vanessa. She stood there wearing a long black coat dusted with snowflakes, her hair pulled back, her makeup minimal, which in itself was a sign something was different. Her eyes were tired, hollowed at the edges like she hadn't slept in weeks. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but in presence, in power. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "Hi." I didn't invite her in. I didn't slam the door either. I just stepped outside, pulled the door shut behind me, and crossed my arms to brace against the chill. "I didn't know where else to go," she said, eyes flicking down to the porch boards. "You found a way before," I said, not bitter, just stating a fact. She closed her eyes, breathed in slowly. I deserved that. "Then why are you here?" There it was, the question that carried the weight of years. It wasn't just about today. It was about everything. The betrayal, the lies, the silence. "Why now?" She looked up, her voice breaking. "Because I finally realized what I destroyed. Not just between you and Ryan, between you and me, between us and Mom. I can't sleep, Brooke. I see her face every time I close my eyes. I hear her voice. I think about what she would say if she knew." "She knew," I cut in. "Maybe not the details, but she always knew what you were capable of. She just kept hoping you'd be better." She winced like the words physically struck her. "I wasn't trying to fall in love with him." I shook my head slowly. "Don't say that to me. She faltered. "I wanted something for myself, for once. I've always felt like the background character in your story." That made me laugh, not cruelly, but in disbelief. "Vanessa, you've never been in the background a single day in your life. You've taken the spotlight every chance you got, even when it wasn't yours." She lowered her gaze. "I know. That's why I'm here. Not for pity, not for forgiveness, just to say it. Out loud. I ruined everything." There was silence between us, thick and unmoving. Snowflakes landed on her shoulders, melted against my skin. "I'm writing a book," I said finally. "About what happened, about the healing, the survival." Her eyes widened slightly. "Am I in it?" "Not by name, but you're there. Your shadow is there." She nodded slowly. "Then say what you need to say." "I already did," I said. That's when the door opened behind me. Marcus stepped outside, holding a second mug of coffee and confusion across his brow. He saw her, saw me, and something in his expression shifted. Calm, protective, steady. "Everything okay?" he asked, voice low. Vanessa looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't seem to be calculating anything. She just nodded faintly. "Yeah," she said. "Better than I deserve." She turned back to me. "I'm leaving Reno. I've been offered a job in Seattle. It's not glamorous. It's not what I'm used to. But it's something. Good," I said. "Do something." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "This is for you. It's from Mom. I found it in her jewelry box months ago. It's addressed to you. I wasn't ready to give it to you before." She handed it to me, her fingers trembling. I took it without a word. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and then she walked down the steps, into the snow, her footprints trailing behind like a quiet confession. Inside, I sat down at the kitchen table, envelope in hand, heart pounding. Marcus sat across from me, silent but close. I opened the letter. "My dearest Brooke, if you're reading this, then I'm already gone. And while I hate the idea of not being there to say these words, I need you to hear them now. You have always been the heart of this family, the anchor, the one who sees people fully and loves them anyway. Even your sister, especially your sister. I know Vanessa has her demons. I know she has hurt you, and I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to stop her from doing it again. But I also know that you are capable of building beauty from ashes. You always have been. You will lose things in this life. People will betray you. Love will fade, or shift, or surprise you. But you will remain. You are not what they did. You are what you choose to do next." Please forgive, not for them, but for you. And when you're ready, let joy back in. I'll be with you always. Mom. I folded the letter slowly, tears sliding down my face. Not from pain this time, but from the echo of something pure, a mother's belief that light still existed in the world. Even after everything, Marcus reached across the table and took my hand. You okay? I nodded. I think so. Later that night, I lit a candle on the windowsill. Not for Vanessa, not even for Ryan, but for my mother, for the girl I used to be, for the woman I was becoming, the woman who had stared into the fire and chosen not to be consumed. The weeks that followed Vanessa's visit passed like a soft rain. Nothing dramatic, no crashing storms, just a steady return to calm. I never replied to her message again. I didn't return the letter she gave me either, but I kept it, tucked it inside my mother's favorite poetry book on the nightstand. Some part of me felt she had done one thing right in the end, giving me those final words. That letter wasn't a key to forgive Vanessa, but it was a doorway back to myself. I continued teaching my workshops, now with even more clarity. The women in my classes didn't need perfect role models. They needed proof that ruin wasn't the end, that you could walk through betrayal, loss, humiliation, and still come out holding something beautiful. That was what I offered them. Not an answer, not a miracle, but presence. I told them the truth, that healing wasn't always a sunrise. Sometimes it was just waking up and deciding to try again. One afternoon, while packing up after a session, a woman named Talia, early 30s, 2 kids, just started a cleaning business, pulled me aside. She looked nervous, eyes darting around the empty classroom. I've been thinking about something you said last week, she began, clutching the strap of her worn canvas bag. You said sometimes letting go isn't about surrender, but about power, about choosing peace over chaos. I nodded. That's right. She looked down at her shoes. I think I'm ready to do that, to let go. Not for them, but for me. That moment stayed with me, because it wasn't grand, it wasn't loud, it was quiet, deliberate, and absolutely revolutionary. Letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing to stop bleeding for someone else's wound. At home, life settled into a gentle rhythm. Marcus and I started gardening together. We built a raised bed behind the house and spent weekends planting basil, rosemary, and cherry tomatoes. Watching something grow under our hands was healing in ways therapy never touched. We'd sip coffee on the porch, hands covered in dirt, talking about nothing and everything. That's what love became for me. Not declarations or gestures, but consistency. Showing up, listening, laughing at inside jokes that had no beginning, holding space for the days that were harder than others. The book was finally finished. I sent the manuscript off with a sense of calm I hadn't expected. It no longer mattered if it became a bestseller or if it disappeared into the literary void. Writing it had changed me. It had stitched together pieces I didn't know were still torn. Marcus read the final draft one evening, sitting across from me at the dining table, eyes moving slowly over every page. When he closed it, he didn't say anything right away. He just reached for my hand and pressed it to his chest. "You're the strongest person I know," he whispered. I believed him. We hosted our first holiday dinner that winter. Nothing fancy, just close friends. 2 of the women from my workshop who had no family nearby, and an older couple from next door. The house smelled like cinnamon and roast chicken. The laughter was easy, unforced, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like something was missing, not even my mother, because somehow she was still there. In the way I arranged the table, in the candles on the windowsill, in the way I looked at the people around me with full, quiet gratitude. A few weeks later, I received an email from a small book club in Portland. One of the early reviewers had passed my manuscript along, and the women in the group had read it together. The organizer wrote, "We cried, we raged, we healed. Thank you for putting into words what so many of us are afraid to admit, that betrayal by those we love isn't the end of the story, and that building something new is a victory all its own." I printed it and taped it to the inside of my journal. The past didn't vanish. It didn't need to. It simply softened. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of it in my dreams. The ache, the silence, the sharp twist of abandonment. But I no longer woke up gasping. I woke up grounded. I could remember without reliving. That was growth. That was the difference. One day, Marcus surprised me with plane tickets to Vermont. "You always said you wanted to see a real fall." He grinned, holding them out like a child revealing a secret. Red leaves, crisp air, flannel everything. We stayed in a small cabin near Woodstock, hiked trails littered with amber and scarlet leaves, ate apple cider donuts and drank spiced lattes by the fire. On our last morning there, I stood outside watching the sunrise stretch across the tree line, painting the world gold. Marcus came up behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and whispered, "You made it." And I had. Not because of revenge, not because of some cosmic justice, but because I chose myself, again and again, in the quiet, in the pain, in the rebuilding. Vanessa never contacted me again. I heard through a distant cousin that she was working at a marketing firm in Seattle, living in a small apartment alone. No news of Ryan, no glamorous photos, no scandals, just silence. And that was enough, because some endings don't require grand closure. Sometimes, the best revenge is living a life so full that there's no room left for bitterness. A life where you don't just survive, you flourish. I began writing a second book. Not a memoir this time, but a collection of stories from other women, their journeys, their scars, their strength. I interviewed them over coffee, in parks, by phone. Some whispered, some shouted, but all of them shared one thing in common. They had come back from something they thought would break them. I ended each chapter with a note. "This is not the end of your story. Keep writing," because that's what I had done. I kept writing, and now, when I look in the mirror, I see more than survival. I see joy, depth, a woman who knows the cost of peace and chooses to pay it every single day. 3 years later, I stood on the stage of a small auditorium in San Francisco, facing an audience of women from all walks of life. Behind me was a large screen with the cover of my second book, Unbroken Threads, Stories of Women Who Refused to Stay Broken. It had just been released a few weeks prior and had already begun to stir quiet waves of attention in circles I never expected to reach. I wasn't a celebrity. I wasn't famous. But my words had found people, and they had stayed. I took a deep breath, fingers lightly gripping the podium, and looked out over the crowd. I thought about where I had been when all of this started, standing in a cemetery, waiting for a man who never showed up, mourning not just the loss of my mother, but of everything I thought I could trust. I thought of the girl I was then, the girl who whispered apologies in the dark, who tried to smile through humiliation, who believed that silence was strength. And then I thought of the woman I had become. "My name is Brooke Ellington," I said into the mic, my voice steady, warm. "And like many of you, I have loved people who didn't love me back in the right way. I've been lied to, used, forgotten, and replaced. But I've also healed, not because it was easy, not because it was quick, but because I chose to walk through the fire instead of staying buried in the ashes." The applause that followed wasn't loud or theatrical. It was steady, deep, the kind that wraps around you like a promise. Later that night, Marcus and I sat together in our hotel room, the city lights blinking beyond the window. He was barefoot, drinking tea and reading a new manuscript I was working on. I was curled into the corner of the couch, wearing one of his old sweaters and writing in my journal, something I did every night before bed. I had pages and pages filled with reflections, moments, gratitude lists. I wrote about the women I'd met on the book tour, single mothers, widows, daughters estranged from their families, cancer survivors. Each one had left a fingerprint on my heart. I also wrote about Vanessa. I hadn't seen her in over 2 years. But she still showed up in my thoughts sometimes, not as a threat, but as a reminder. She was a living example of what happens when people choose manipulation over connection, when they reach for control instead of healing. I no longer hated her. I no longer wished her harm, but I also didn't miss her. I had finally made peace with the fact that sometimes closure doesn't come through reconciliation. Sometimes it comes through acceptance and boundaries. One morning, just before we returned home to Reno, I received a postcard with no return address. The handwriting was familiar, slanted, rushed. I saw your interview. You look happy. I'm glad. V. I held the card for a long time. No tears came, no tremor in my hands. I placed it in the back of my journal and said nothing. It was enough. Her acknowledging my happiness, even anonymously, was more than I ever expected. At home, our life unfolded in 1,000 small, beautiful ways. We adopted a golden retriever puppy named Clover. I started leading weekend retreats for women, blending writing exercises with hikes through the Sierra Nevada. Marcus expanded his consulting firm and hired 3 employees who all used to be part of underserved communities. Our house felt like a sanctuary, not because it was fancy, but because it held no secrets. In the spring, we planted a magnolia tree in the backyard, just beneath the kitchen window. My mother had once said that magnolias bloomed as if they remembered something soft, like a life before hurt. Every morning I sat with my coffee and watched it stretch toward the sky. I also began writing letters I never sent. One for Ryan, one for Vanessa, one for the girl I was before everything collapsed. These weren't letters of bitterness, but letters of release. In Ryan's, I wrote that I hoped he found peace, even if it meant I'd never know where he went. I hoped he learned to love someone not as a possession, but as a person. In Vanessa's, I wrote that I hoped she built something for herself that didn't depend on destroying others. And to the younger Brooke, I wrote that I was proud of her, for surviving, for not letting betrayal be the final chapter. Those letters sat in a wooden box on my bookshelf. I never reread them. I didn't need to. One afternoon in late summer, as Marcus and I walked along the Truckee River, he asked me a question I hadn't expected. "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" He said softly. "All of it. Your sister, Ryan, the pain." We paused by the water, the current whispering its timeless song around us. I thought about it. Really thought. "I wish it hadn't had to happen," I said. "But I'm not sure I'd be who I am without it." He nodded. Me neither. Because that was the strange, beautiful truth. The darkest chapter of my life had also been the one that revealed my strength. It introduced me to the version of myself I never would have met otherwise. And while I never romanticized the pain, I honored the transformation it sparked. Years later, when I published my 3rd book, a novel this time, I included a dedication at the front, for those who were hurt and still chose to heal, for those who were forgotten and still chose to love, for the women who rebuild, not in spite of the fire, but because of it. The book went on to be translated into several languages, not because it was groundbreaking, but because it was true. In a quiet moment, during one of the writing retreats I hosted in Lake Tahoe, a young woman approached me during a break. She was trembling, holding a worn copy of my first memoir. Her eyes were wide, brimming with tears. "I left him," she said simply, "because of your book, because of your story." I realized I wasn't crazy. I wasn't weak. I was just scared, and I didn't want to be scared anymore. I took her hands in mine, steadied her breath, and said the only thing I could. "You're not alone. You never were." Because that was what I had learned most of all. That even in the moments when I felt abandoned, unseen, shattered, I was never truly alone. There were others walking that same path in different shoes, facing different names, but fighting the same battles. And we found each other. We lit candles in the dark for one another. We built bridges from our scars. So now, when I think of vengeance, I don't see flames. I see gardens, words, connection, a room full of women telling the truth for the first time. I see love that doesn't demand silence. I see the face of a man who chose me without condition. And I see myself, not perfect, not invincible, but whole. That is the ending I chose. That is the life I claimed. And it is more than enough. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted more than anyone? Someone who should have protected you, but instead left you shattered? Share your story in the comments below. If this journey touched something in your heart, please like and subscribe for more stories of healing, redemption, and strength. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their past does not define their future. And remember, sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be. Thank you for listening to my story.